Their baying chills the heart and spreads icy tendrils of fear through weak and mortal souls. And yet worse, yet more terrible to behold, are the huntsmen of this fell pack. Following close upon the hounds, urging them ever forward, come deformed beings, running and shrieking, shrieking and running, driven by the sateless bloodlust of their kind. With twisted crimson frames, they speed across the blighted land, crouched over as if the better to track the terror spore of their prey. Masters of the hunt, they seek the blood of man to offer at the foot of the Skull Throne, ever hungry for fresh prey, ever willing to tear the warm flesh with their talons and to smear the gore triumphant upon their curving horns.
Greetings, heretics, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
We've put it off for long enough, so I think now it's time for us to descend into the realm of chaos.
Back in the first edition Warhammer 40k rulebook, there is an absence of something that might be surprising to those that haven't had the chance to read it. There's no chaos. No Chaos Space Marines, and no demons. Sort of. That state of affairs would obviously not last, and after a short while we'd get the two-part Realm of Chaos series, with the first book, Slaves to Darkness, coming out in 1988, and the second, The Lost and the Damned, coming out in 1990. Although, according to an interview with Rogue Trader author Rick Priestley, they were in development since at least 1983, originally intended for Warhammer Fantasy Battles 1st edition.
Both original books are relatively expensive to get hold of nowadays, with The Lost and the Damned being particularly bad. The copies we have were generously sent to us by a lovely gentleman by the name of Storm Knight, who I'm fairly certain, should we ever have any, we'd now owe our firstborn child to. So yeah, thank you Storm Knight, and if you ever get a baby in the post, now you know why. And as much as we'd like to cover both these books in one video, they are both pretty long and dense, so today we're just going to be dealing with Slaves to Darkness.
We will be dealing with Lost and the Damned at a later date. So, what is actually in Slaves to Darkness? Well, it contains lore and rules for the use of Chaos Forces in Warhammer Fantasy Battles 3rd edition, Warhammer 40,000 1st edition, and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, something possible due to the similarity of the three rule sets. It also means we get to tick off Ditto Codex Compliant on a Warhammer Fantasy, a Rogue Trader, and a GW Specialist Gamebook all in one go. How's that for efficiency? This book covers the Chaos Gods Khorne and Slaanesh, with the second book covering Tzeentch and Nurgle, and as you can see from the contents alone, there's a lot here, so we won't be able to cover absolutely everything, just enough to give you a fair impression. You know, we put those bits in scripts so people won't go, actually, I think you'll find you forgot about X, when in reality, we just leave those parts out.
I mean, it never actually works, but you know, it's good to keep hope alive. The book proper starts with a short story about Inquisitor Thrax, who, having just purged a Marine chapter of their Chaos corruption, was seduced by the ruinous powers himself, possibly by a very fancy table, causing him to eat his scribe. Inquisitor Thrax shares his name with Inquisitor Thrax from the video game Space Marine, but they are presumably not the same person. Also, the Marine chapter mentioned are the Grey Slayers, a name now used for a Heresy-era Space Wolf troop. All this confirming our long-held belief that Games Workshop were cursed by a passing wizard sometime in the 80s to have to use every single name they've ever come up with at least twice. See Rogue Trader and Dark Millennium, or Realm of Chaos for that matter.
One of the instantly noticeable things in the book is the art, and we're not just talking about the lovely cover by John Civic. Between the old school RPG look and a greater level of consistency compared to, say, the Rogue Trader rulebook, there's just something very appealing about it. Seriously, there is some gorgeous work in this book, and this chaotic border really ties it all together. It also has a wonderful little feature that should be in every book like this forever. Next to most of the pieces you'll see a small symbol. That symbol relates to a legend at the start of the book that tells you who drew it. So if you look at something like this and wonder who exactly drew it and why, you can check and know that Paul Campbell drew it. Why he did so remains a mystery, but honestly we are so glad that he did.
Moving on, this book contains mountains and mountains of lore, and it's pretty important lore as well. You see, although the Forces of Chaos did exist in Warhammer Fantasy Battles long before this, they weren't quite as fleshed out as they are now, being more, you know, just the bad people in the spiky helmets. The Realm of Chaos books are pretty much entirely where the modern interpretation of Chaos for both Fantasy and 40k originates from, even if a lot of it has been retconned over the last 30 years. So this early depiction of the blood god Khorne and his followers is pretty accurate even now, partially because Khorne is and always has been about as subtle and nuanced as a shot of absinthe mixed with jet fuel.
The gore-maddened followers of Khorne harry beyond the edges of the known world, delighting in slaughter by the tainted light of a blood-stained moon. Khorne watches the wild destruction wrought in his name, and his bellows of rage and delight can be heard echoing across the void between worlds.
Slaanesh is also pretty similar, although like other earlier interpretations like this thing, it tends to portray Slaanesh's influence as leaning a smidge heavier on the sexual aspect of it than it does nowadays. I suppose the target audience was a bit older back then, and hey, they had to earn this neat little warning label somehow. Actually, fun fact, one of the ways you can quickly tell an original print from the modern reprint is that the new ones don't have this warning. The description of Slaanesh also describes them as taking the form of, and I quote, a bisexual humanoid, male on the left side, female on the right. Which is not exactly how the term bisexual is used in common parlance, but I suppose in the 80s it was a little harder to just look up bilateral gynandromorphism on Wikipedia.
Another interesting point that it touches upon is the idea that the 4 Chaos Gods could all just be facets of one greater entity that represents the whole of Chaos. The great unnameable one, the unspeakable shapeless beast, the Lord of Chaos. But maybe not. It's also totally fine with you inventing your own Chaos Gods, so if you wish to create, say, Quip, the Chaos God of puns, then there's nothing stopping you. Still, much of the lore for the demons and gods in here is designed to be usable in both fantasy and 40k, with the majority of the book feeling more geared towards Warhammer Fantasy, which makes sense since the realm of chaos is a concept far more connected to fantasy than its sci-fi sibling. But there are some large segments in the later part of the book that are dedicated to expanding 40k lore and adapting what already exists to better suit the existence of chaos. For example, the warp was there from the beginning, as were warp entities, but as of this book, chaos is now tied to the warp, and from now on the other warp entities will be mostly forgotten over time in favour of demons. There's an early version of the Fall of the Eldar in here too, where their descent is caused explicitly by chaos worship.
There's some stuff in here that is of, dubious canonicity now. Like the Illuminati, a secret society who consists entirely of people who were once possessed by demons who now seek to thwart the fall of the Emperor and Chaos's eventual rule. There's also a particularly infamous bit of old lore, the Sensei. Now, what are the Sensei? Well, the Emperor was walking amongst humanity for tens of thousands of years before he revealed himself, and from time to time he'd get bored, settle down and raise a family for a bit before quietly vanishing. As you can see, being an absent father is more of a lifestyle than a hobby for the Emperor of mankind.
His sons, there's no mention of daughters for reasons I'm sure wouldn't be frustrating if we thought about them, well, those sons, they never age and are psychic blanks. They are portrayed as being just generally decent chaps who secretly fight chaos, with only a few siding with the ruinous powers as Grey Sensei. And the Illuminati kinda, sorta want to gather all the Sensei together to feed them to the Emperor to rebirth him. You know, as you do.
Oh, and did we mention that
The Chaos Marine slaves
are fitted with an explosive collar so their superiors can just detonate it and explode them whenever they feel like it? Because that's in here as well. They're like some kind of suicide squad. There's a section on the Horus Heresy too, and from what we understand, this is the first time we got an in-depth explanation of what happened. Like much of the lore from this era, it would change a lot before the end of 1st edition, let alone compared to its modern incarnation. For example, in Slaves to Darkness, Horus isn't mentioned as being a Primarch since they didn't really exist yet, he's just General Horus. There's not even mention of him being a Space Marine unless these two images are supposed to be him, in which case he had a bit more hair in the 80s, something I feel a lot of people can probably relate to. The Emperor doesn't teleport to the Vengeful Spirit for the final battle, he teleports to Horus's command bunker and Sanguinius is nowhere to be seen. However, despite all that, a lot in here is still canon.
Horus was still turned on Davin, the Eisenstein was still the ship that got the word out about Horus's betrayal, and the Istvan V drop site massacre still happens, although it was even worse with only 5 Loyalist Marines surviving. Honestly, it's really interesting to see how the events we've read about for years in the Heresy series were originally interpreted, and also a great illustration of how fluid and ever-changing 40k lore has been. Look, we could talk for days about all the fluff that's in this book, but since we're aiming for this video to be roughly finite in length, how about we just take a look at what you can actually do with it?
Well, one of the first, and most immediately fun things, are the demon name generators. There's 2 different ones since demons have a true name, the near unpronounceable name that they keep hidden as it can be used to control them, and a use name, which is what they usually respond to. As fun as it would be to roll on the true name table and get utter gibberish like Fliomgagackle, We thought we'd roll on the username one and see what we'd be called if we were demons.
So I would be Room Spume Rutbile.
And I would be Fang Throb Buttock Glutton. Think it's fair to say that my dice hate me.
Of course, these are just a guide, and you can name your demons whatever you want, but we thought you'd like to know that there's a 1 in 64,684,950 chance that, using this table, you could make the name Lewd Smut Crabfondle.
Regardless of whatever name they have, the different kinds of demons are listed here too, with all of the Khornate and Slaneshi demonic troops listed and described. For Khorne, there are Bloodthirsters, Bloodletters, Fleshhounds, and Juggernauts. And for Slanesh, there are Keepers of Secrets, Demonettes, Fiends, and Mounts. As well as flavor text that helps you visualize things like the long feminine legs of the Mounts of Slanesh. It also provides a host of alternate names these demons are known by. So the next time you encounter a player running demons, you should insist on only referring to their Bloodthirsters as Eaters of Gore and Flesh, their Bloodletters as Naked Slayers, and their Juggernauts should simply be referred to as Juggers. Yeah, no, maybe don't do that last one.
Of course, there are proper army lists in here as well, and as ever with forces from this era, the range of things you can field is surprisingly varied, with the standard chaotically corrupted humans and demons being joined by beastmen, chaos dwarves, chaos goblins, dark elves, trolls, and undead. There's also the in-depth creation of chaos champions and their retinues, more on that later, which could be used in smaller narrative campaigns, as well as the ability to play with demonic legions battling for their particular flavour of dark god on the chaos wastes. In short, though we're no experts on old-school Warhammer Fantasy, or indeed Warhammer Fantasy or Age of Sigmar at all, this book did seem to cater for whatever sort of game you wanted out of Fantasy at the time. Hey, wait a minute, does this Fleshhound have a Khornate cutie mark? Huh.
40k, as you would imagine, got its own lists. The ones in here give you the ability to field traitors from the Black Legion, the Emperor's Children, and the World Eaters, all with demonic and beastmen accompaniment, along with a list for the Grey Knights if playing Imperial is more your speed. There are differences between these in a modern list, like Chaos being able to field Librarians, Tech Marines, and Chaplains. However, each army list has an introduction telling you about who they are, some of which is still accurate. They mention the World Eater's original colours being blue and white, they mention the Emperor's Children's attempts to clone Horus after his death, and it even mentions the Black Legion, then the Lunar Wolves, taking part in the Ullanor Crusade.
It's also quite fun to see the Grey Knights presented as closer to a standard Marine chapter, although in here their chapter master is stated to always be an Inquisitor rather than an Astartes. Not only are they all beakies rather than the knightly looking lads we have now, but their units are more mundane too, using things like Devastators or tactical squads. As you'd expect, you're able to take Inquisitors, but you can also take Guardsmen and even Arbites too, which is pretty neat. 40k also had some unique rules regarding such fun topics as demonic possession and teleporter accidents, where your squad could spontaneously all turn into bloodthirsters, just for the hell of it.
However, a large chunk of the book is taken up with giving you rules to create your own Chaos Champion or Renegade. These are basically hero characters, with champions being for fantasy and renegades for 40k, although they share most of the same rules and abilities. The base creature you start with is randomly assigned and is different whether you're playing fantasy or 40k. The process can be fairly convoluted, so we thought we'd make a renegade as an example. We rolled for it and got a human champion as our base. Let's call him Colin. Although we got a boring regular human, we should mention that there is a chance to roll up strange creations like Chaos Tyranids, a Corrupted Custodes, or even a Chaos Zote.
So, let's start off with Colin. We're going to have him as a follower of Khorne, so as well as being jolly cross all the time, he'll receive some Chaos armour and rolls on this big hecker of a table for a Chaos attribute. We roll a D1000 and get 289. Crest.
The mutant's head is adorned with a crest. This can be a bird-like wattled or feathered crest, or a reptilian membrane.
He would also get the appropriate equipment as defined in the Rogue Trader rulebook. So by the end of this process, Colin has become Colin the Human Cockatoo, a lasgun-wielding crested champion of Khorne. Now, all this seems pretty simple, but after this he'd be able to get more upgrades through fighting battles and making kills. So Colin would have the chance to get fancy chaos weapons, a batch of chaos hounds to play with, or even become a spawn or demon prince if the conditions are right. Indeed, that is sort of the inevitable end point of any of these characters eventually. You could also pick up a bunch more chaos attributes, such as the ability to breathe fire, having a really long neck, gaining a homunculus instead of most of your face, gaining a crown of noses, becoming a robot, baby head, or just having uncontrollable flatulence. Quite a lot of these were also in the Rogue Trader rulebook's Mutant Generation rules, so we thought you'd like to know that yes, bird feet are here, although it's a lot less judgmental and makes no mention of them being unattractive. Hell, they actually give a stat bonus now.
There are gifts you can get from the specific god your champion worships too, so people who like, comment, and subscribe to Khorne can get things like having their face become like that of any Khornate demon or even Khorne himself, regeneration, an aggression bonus, or having their hand fuse with their weapon. People who pay more than 5 Imperial credits per month to Slaanesh's Patreon campaign may acquire gifts like familiars, ensnaring tongues, that'd probably be handled way differently now, or a big ol' crab claw. And we've not even touched on the retinue rules because that is one whole extra thing. Renegades and champions can get a retinue as they gain more rewards, and the units created also get their own traits that you roll on. As you can imagine, this system can be used to create a huge variety of different Chaos champions, and it gets very unwieldy very quickly.
Seriously, these hero rules are scattered all throughout the book, so it's very easy to get lost. I mean, just look at this ridiculous flowchart they give you to try and help. Modern tabletop gamers don't understand how easy we have it. But hey, how many other books let you manage the rules for a musky, silly-voiced, chainsaw-wielding Slaaneshi goblin who died and came back as a skeleton warrior? Not many, I'd wager. But now let's take a quick look at the pretty colour section. In here there's a host of old-school models, from a selection of fantasy creations, like this book-wielding Slaaneshi champion, to demons, like the spindly bloodletters, to the early line of 40k Chaos minis released under the Realm of Chaos line. And there is something oddly pleasing about those early Chaos miniatures, with their armour feeling more mutated and organic than the later incarnations of the models. Also, the old Bloodthirster model is pretty goofy. I love him. Around this part of the book, there's also an heavy metal painting guide that gives you a bunch of advice on how to paint your Chaos miniatures. There's honestly some pretty great advice in here even today, such as how to give black more depth, the usefulness of real-life reference, and that it's usually a good idea to try out new techniques on old figures before you do them on your fancy new ones.
As well as the models, there are examples of Khornate and Slaaneshi iconography in the colour section. Given this was the 80s, they tend to be pretty on the nose, so the fantasy examples have things like a Khornate shield with the word blurred across it, or a Slaaneshi boob bird banner, or just a boob shield. The 40k ones do get a bit more specific, showing icons for various Chaos Legions. Some are quite different to today's, like the old icons for the Alpha Legion or Emperor's Children. The Night Lord's old bat icon is also an adorable baby, and nothing you can say will convince me otherwise.
Oh, and we'll talk about the connections that some people say these books draw between fantasy canon and 40k canon when we do The Lost and the Damned.
But spoiler, it ain't as explicit as people make out.
So, what can we say about Slaves to Darkness? Well, it's pretty great, honestly. Whilst some of the mechanics might be conveyed in a more complicated manner than necessary, once you figure it out there's a wealth of entertainment to be had even if you're never going to play any games using it, or at least we've had a lot of fun rolling up champions and demon names. And again, there is so much that we've not mentioned, like a lot of the Warhammer Fantasy stuff that we're not really that qualified to comment on since we're not fantasy players. So really, go and take a look for yourself if you can, it's good stuff.
And to be honest, this book is a great example of one of the things that we want to showcase with this series. The stuff in Slaves to Darkness is old and mostly obsolete. Some of the concepts have remained, but a lot has changed, and some of it was retconned away entirely. It was a stepping stone to get where things currently stand in 40k and Age of Sigmar. At the end of the day, change is inevitable in any long-running creative work, especially when so many different people are involved. It can be done well, or it can be done badly, and honest critique of that is fine and healthy. But it's going to happen, and this series is a sort of celebration of that fact, because change means there's many different versions, many interpretations of the same idea. And that's kinda awesome.
After all, one of the bonuses of tabletop games over, say, a long-running online game, is that you can easily go back and enjoy its previous iterations. We can never go back and play the specific builds of Team Fortress 2 that we played far too much of, but we can, as we have in this video, go through an old rulebook. There's nothing stopping you from playing a game using Slaves to Darkness in the present day other than finding someone willing to play with you. Likewise, you can play older editions of D&D or old school Necromunda. You could even play a game of 6th edition 40k if that's something you wanted to do, for some reason. I guess what we're trying to say is that 40k fantasy, they might change, but these old rulebooks don't, and sometimes it's just nice to go back and take a look at how the setting and the ideas contained within were interpreted at that time, and how that informs what we have now.
Probably should have saved that speech about change for a book that contained Siege, but that's probably fine.